Hello everyone. Today's topic is thoracic wall. I will discuss it under these headings: introduction, the components of the thoracic wall, then about the intercostal spaces, its contents, the details of intercostal muscles, nerves and blood vessel, and lastly the applied aspects. Coming to the introduction, the thorax is the upper part of the trunk which is formed externally by musculoskeletal cage, and that cage is known as the thoracic wall. That musculoskeletal cage is known as the thoracic wall, and internally it forms a cavity, that is the thoracic cavity. This thoracic cavity is having an opening superiorly, and that is the thoracic inlet which communicate with the neck. Inferiorly there is another opening which is closed by the diaphragm that separate this thorax from the abdominal cavity. Coming to the thoracic wall proper, we will see the components of the thoracic wall. The thoracic wall consists of skeletal elements, then muscles, and also the blood vessels and nerves supplying them. First we will see the skeletal element of the thoracic wall. The skeletal element of thorax is also known as the thoracic cage, which is formed posteriorly by the 12 pairs of thoracic vertebra, then laterally by the 12 pairs of ribs and also their costal cartilages, and anteriorly by the sternum. The sternum is having three parts: manubrium, body and xiphoid process. This manubrium forms an angle posteriorly with the body at the manubriosternal joint, and that angle is known as the sternal angle. The sternal angle is a surface landmark as the second intercostal cartilage attached to the sternal angle, and also the lower border of fourth thoracic vertebra also corresponds to this sternal angle. Thus, this sternal angle is clinically important, and it is taken as the surface landmark for the examination of the thorax. Now, we will see the intercostal spaces. So these, as I already mentioned, that the thoracic wall consists of skeletal elements, muscles, and also the blood vessels and nerves supplying them. So we have already seen what all structure forms the skeletal framework of the thoracic wall. Now we will see the other components. They are the muscles, then the nerves and blood vessels. All these three components, that is muscles, blood vessels and nerves, they are present in the intercostal spaces. So these intercostal spaces are the spaces bound between adjacent ribs and their costal cartilages. So we will see the details of intercostal space. So there are 11 pairs or 11 intercostal spaces on either side of the sternum. So they are the upper 9 intercostal spaces are closed anteriorly, but the lower 2 intercostal spaces, they are open anteriorly, and they will only reach up to the mid-axillary line. And these intercostal spaces, they are very narrow towards the vertebral side or on the posterior aspect, and they become broader at their sternal ends, and their maximum width is present at the costochondral junction. Then moving on to the contents of the intercostal spaces. So the intercostal space consists of the intercostal muscles, blood vessels and nerves. First we will see the intercostal muscles. There are 3 flat intercostal muscles in each space. From superficial to deep, they are the external intercostal muscle, internal intercostal muscle and innermost intercostal muscle. The external intercostal muscle takes origin from the outer lip of the lower margin of the rib above, and they get inserted into the outer lip of the rib below. For example, this is the third external intercostal muscle which is present in the third intercostal space. So this muscle take origin from the lower border of the third rib and get inserted into the upper border of the rib below, that is the fourth rib. And the direction of the fibers of external intercostal muscle is downward, forward and medially. It is downward, forward and medially as we insert our hands in pants pocket. So that is the external intercostal muscle. This external intercostal muscle again have two parts, interosseous part and interchondral part. The interchondral part is membranous, that means between the two cartilages, costal cartilages, the external intercostal muscle modified to form a membrane, that is the external or that is the anterior intercostal membrane. The interosseous part of the external intercostal muscle is fleshy, and this is the main external intercostal muscle. So it has an anterior part that is membrane and called as the anterior intercostal membrane. The nerves supplying the external intercostal muscle is the intercostal nerve present in the corresponding intercostal space. The action of external intercostal muscle is to elevate the ribs, and thus they will increases the anteroposterior and transverse diameter of the thoracic cage. Moving to the internal intercostal muscle. The internal intercostal muscle take origin from the costal groove of the rib above, and they get inserted into the inner lip of the rib below. So that is the original insertion of internal intercostal muscle, and this internal intercostal muscle is again modified into the posterior intercostal membrane, and which is present beyond the angle of rib, that is on the posterior aspect only we will get the posterior intercostal membrane. The anterior part is fully fleshy. Both the interosseous part and interchondral part of the internal intercostal muscle is fleshy. This innermost intercostal muscle is a discontinuous muscle, and they are divided into three parts. Anteriormost one is the sternocostalis, which take origin from the posterior aspect of the lower part of sternum, the xiphoid process, and also from the lower costal cartilages of 7th to 4th rib. Then they get inserted into the 2nd to 6th rib. So they are originating from medially and they get inserted just laterally. So that is about the sternocostalis muscle. Then about the intercostalis intimus muscle. That is the next part of the third muscle. So they originate from the they originate from the ridge above the costal groove and get inserted into the upper border of the rib below. And the last part or the posterior part of the innermost intercostal muscle is the subcostalis, and this subcostalis is present on the lower intercostal spaces on the posterior aspect. They take origin from the lower ribs and they will cross one or two intercostal spaces and get inserted into the lower rib. So that is about the subcostalis muscle.